Oh, welcome back to Trevor on Tribe FM 91.1. I've got Merv Trimper on the line. Good morning, Merv. How are you?
Good morning, Trevor. Good morning, listeners.
Yeah, I'm going well here. Right, now, for those that don't know much about the rose world, what's your background in roses, mate?
Well, I'm an amateur rose grower. I'm not professional, but I've been involved in roses for probably all my adult life, so that's about 40 years. And past roles include past president of the Rose Society of South Australia, past national president, so president of the National Rose Society of Australia. Currently my role is primarily as coordinator of the National Rose Trial Garden, which is in Adelaide in the Botanic Gardens.
Yep, I mean, we want to talk a little bit about the National Rose Trial Garden, because I don't think a lot of people have heard much about it and what it actually does. Can you explain exactly what it's all about?
Yes, certainly. The National Rose Trial Garden trials roses, so that means we test new varieties, do that over a 2 or 3 year period, depending upon the type of rose. Like climbers take a little bit longer to mature, so we give them an extra year. They're roses that are not released when they're put in the trial, so they're not released for sale. And when we trial them, the people who assess them don't know which varieties they are. And we usually have around about 50 different types of roses, different cultivars each year. And we plant three or four plants of each variety, and then those roses are assessed by a panel of assessors every month between October and May each year.
All right, so they actually got a set of judges that go through and have a look at them?
Yes, yeah, and the judges range from people who are involved in the nursery industry, so we've got a couple of nursery owners. We've got people involved in the fertiliser industry, so we've got someone from Neutrog who assesses them. Some of the staff of the Botanic Gardens and the other assessors are interested rose growers.
So when you say assesses them, is there a formal judging course to learn how to judge roses?
Well, these roses are assessed for 3 main categories. So obviously we assess how they flower, which most people think is the most important category. So the flowering is assessed, how many flowers, if the flower is a new type of flower, if it's striped or an unusual shape. In other words, the novelty factor, fragrance comes into it. And then the bush is assessed. So is it true to type? In other words, has it got a nice shape? Are they even amongst the 3 or 4 plants that are growing? Is it true to form for a floribunda or a ground cover or a hybrid tea bush? And then probably one of the most important areas of assessment is its disease resistance. So the roses that are planted in the trial garden are not sprayed at all during that 2-year period. They're basically planted, watered and fertilised.
So I'm guessing here, because I'm not a rose grower, but anything bred in Australia for Australian conditions would probably outperform European or American type plants?
Yes and no. We have no full-time professional rose breeders as such in Australia. We have some who are sort of semi-professional, but because we have no professional rose breeders as such, that means that they don't have the gene bank, if you like, of varieties that some of the overseas growers have. So some of the overseas breeders of roses, it's been a family-owned business that in some cases goes back 100 years. So over that 100 years, they've got a bank of their own roses that are very disease resistant or suitable to many climates. And the introducers, the importers of those varieties, the agents of those breeding houses, generally will select roses to come to Australia that they think will suit our climate. So they're not going to suit a rose that they don't think will come to the climate. So the Australian rose breeders have, obviously, they're breeding roses in Australia for our conditions, but because they don't have the same number of roses in their bank, if you like, sometimes their roses don't necessarily have an advantage over the European or the American roses.
All right, yeah, it's a bit like orchids, where the orchid growers have got a good gene pool, especially with some of the Australian native orchids like Kingianums, Speciosums, and they line breed them, but I don't think that's possible in roses from memory. But
no, in roses, I mean, a lot of the roses that are bred by the breeders are never released, so they will keep some in their nurseries or in the area where they're breeding, and they will use them to make further crosses. So we never know, or the public never knows, what the father and mother of the rose is. It's something that they keep close to their chest if it's something very special. So that is important. And of course, the other thing to know, and I'm sure most people do know, is that there are no native or natural roses in the southern hemisphere.
No.
All the native roses are in the northern hemisphere.
Yeah, so they've all been imported at some stage from the northern hemisphere.
Yeah,
yep.
So exactly.
And another thing, we're talking about the judging side of it at the National Rose Trial Garden, that the People's Choice, people can go along and actually have a vote themselves.
Yes, yeah. So one weekend a year, we have a People's Choice weekend. So this is open to the public, and anyone who's either in the Botanic Gardens or if they especially want to come in and vote, that's fantastic. So this is on the 6th and the 7th of April this year. So it's the first weekend in April between 10 o'clock and 4 p.m. And all they need to do is pick their top 5 in order. So the one they like the best is obviously number 1. So they pick their top 5 in order from the roses in the second year of the trial, and we indicate which ones are available to pick. So not all roses flower all the time, so it won't be necessarily all of them. So there might be 25 or 30 of which they need to select their top 5.
Okay, so how many beds would you have there?
How many beds of roses?
Yep.
Well, the beds of roses contain many varieties. So for each year, we probably have about 8 beds of roses, and bearing in mind that we have 50 varieties, so it's roughly 200 plants.
So the public will have quite a task in front of them judging it then. They'll have quite a few to pick from.
Well, we limit it to the ones that are flowering, so usually that's about 25 different varieties of roses that they need to choose their top 5 roses from. So hopefully the roses will be flowering on time. With the weather it's a little bit difficult this year. Roses got affected by that massive heat wave that we had. So it's we're hoping that they'll be flowering on that weekend.
That'll be a tough enough job. 25 roses and you've got to pick your top 5. For someone
Yes.
who really like their roses, that's going to be a bit of a task, I would think.
Well, everyone picks, and there's trends in roses like everything else, fashion. Everyone picks them their own way. Interestingly enough, a lot of men like red roses. A lot of women like fragrant roses. So they will use their own criteria. The rose experts, if you like, the assessors, will quite often look at the roses and think if that rose is covered in flowers, they'll go for that one rather than necessarily the fragrance or the colour of the flower, unless it's something very unique. So there are some very good roses, some very floriferous roses, in other words, roses which have lots of flowers on them in this year's trial. So it will be a tough choice, but there's a nice little prize at the end of it. If someone gets the top 5 in the correct order, and we amass all the votes and work out what was the most popular one, if someone gets the top 5 or nearest to the top 5, in other words, they get 4, then they can win a prize to the value of $1,000, which is supported by nurseries and the Rose Society.
And they only get one voting slip, do they?
They only get one voting slip.
So I can see an obvious perk there. Just go and keep voting till you get it right.
Yeah.
But, so when the assessors come in, like you say, they judge in 3 categories. Do they ever put their mind to what would be a good commercial rose?
Yes, they do. They're judging the rose against the criteria of how that rose will look in a garden. They're not judging the rose from the point of view of how it's going to look in a rose show. They're judging it on how it would grow, and we treat the roses pretty harshly. We don't baby them, as I said. We don't spray them. So they're from the point of view that the rose is going to be grown by a member of the public who is not necessarily a rose expert. Hopefully they're a keen gardener and will give the plant water and fertiliser at the appropriate time, but certainly not from the point of view of spraying.
Yep, so that's the fairest way to do it too. You just got to remember that the average person's going to go down to the local nursery, buy possibly a bare root of rose, go home, throw it in the garden without too much preparation, and they need it to keep on thriving. And
the breeders of the roses, or their agents, if the rose is bred overseas, once the rose has finished the trial and if the rose wins a medal, they can certainly advertise that fact on their publicity, that this has been a medal winner. And so, if you're going to buy a rose from one of the rose nurseries and it's got the medal on it, either a gold, silver or bronze, that it's a pretty good rose. It's going to do well, particularly in our climate.
Yep, so the international breeders, that you're growing some of the roses from international breeders down at the National Rose Trial Garden. How do those plants come in? Do they come through quarantine?
Those plants come in through quarantine, and because of the quarantine restrictions, the only way roses can come into Australia is either via South Africa or via Japan. So it's a bit of a long-winded process for them. So the roses, they have to grow them in Japan or in South Africa, and then they come into Australia. They're inspected by the budwood, which is used, so the plants don't come in. The budwood, which is used, is inspected by the quarantine officers, and then it's put in a isolated plot of ground, and it's grown there for 12 months, and it's checked during that period of time that it doesn't have any diseases or any virus or any other issues, and then the nurseries can start propagating from that, and once they're propagated, they then decide whether they're going to put it in the trial garden or whether they're just going to...
so that explains the system. So they can go and get cuttings from the one that's planted in the quarantine area?
Yes, yeah.
Right. So I was imagining like orchids where you'd come in a container of different roses and they'd have to go through the methyl bromide spray or something like that.
Well, they are sprayed and they are treated when they come in, so that the understock is not the actual plant. So this is not the understock. The budwood is treated, and quite frankly, not all budwood survives. I mean, I've talked to some of the agents for the overseas breeders, and I think here 12 months ago, and one of the nurseries was starting up, bringing in roses from an Italian breeder, those roses we haven't had in Australia before, and his whole first batch did not survive.
Yeah, well, I've heard that about orchids too, Merv.
Yeah,
so they get sprayed.
They've gone through quarantine. They've been inspected. They've been sprayed, and then they were budded onto understock, and they're being held in the isolated plot, and none of them survived. So something happened in the process that he lost a whole year. So he's had to put back his program 12 months, which is unfortunate, but that's what we need to do, I guess.
So no one's thought of cloning roses and bring them in sterile flask and growing them like that? Is that possible?
Well, you can grow roses from cutting, obviously, and they can, from that point of view, I guess cutting is really a clone of its parent. But I'm not too sure whether the cost involved and the success rate of its production, whether any of the introducers do that. I'm not aware that they do. I think they stick to the more traditional method.
I'll have to look that up myself, because that's how orchids have come in clone material. Or they can bring seedlings in as well, but bred from seed. But some people, when you get a good orchid, you take the apical growth of the orchid, then you clone that piece of tissue and produce up to 10,000 plants identical. So, yeah, I'll have to look and see if roses are a possibility.
Yeah, I think they have been grown from tissue culture, but I'm not too sure on their success rate. A lot of roses in Europe are now not grown where they are grafted onto understock. They are grown on their own roots, so they're taken from cuttings, and this is a cheaper way of producing them. So a lot of roses are now being developed so that they will be cutting grown, and that takes out the very costly part of producing roses, which is growing understock and grafting them onto understock. In Australia, I'm not too sure how successful that's going to be, because our soil conditions do vary a lot from state to state, whereas here in South Australia we're more alkaline, Victoria is more acidic, and then of course when you go further north it's more tropical, so the weather conditions are again. So we recommend different understock for different states, and in Western Australia it's much more sandy, so they have a different understock to grow their roses on again. So whether that will come in the long run, I think with more and more Australian bred roses, there may be some of those that are cutting grown, so we will wait and see on that side of things.
Yep, and another very exciting thing that's coming up here in Adelaide in 2021, which sounds a long way away, but when you're planning these things, it's not, and that's the World Rose Convention here in Adelaide. So that's going to be a massive thing for the rose world here.
Yes, and we've been planning already for 12 months, and plans are well underway. In spring, in October in 2021, the World Federation of Rose Societies conference will be held in Adelaide, and this is a conference which is held every 3 years in various spots around the world. It's a bit like the Olympics. The country that hosts the conference needs to bid. So Australia bid some time ago, and we got the rights to hold this conference in 2021. The conference has the theme Celebrate 21, as we do with 21st birthdays. I don't know how relevant that is anymore with younger people, but we're having Celebrating 21 as the theme. So plans are well underway, and the Rose Societies around the state, or the various states, are working hard planning tours, and we're planning speakers, and we have a rose show. In fact, we will have more than a rose show. The plan is to have a more of a green life exhibition in the convention centre at the same time as the event in October 2021. So we're looking forward to that.
Going to other plants here as well, so other types of plants. Yep, the Orchid Club of South Australia has been contacted about that, so we're busily thinking about whether we will be involved. I hope we do.
Yes, and we're looking forward to seeing other plants I think some of the floral artists being involved, and so it's a big event. We think at this stage we've already got some sponsorship from one of the growers who grow a lot of or breed a lot of glasshouse roses. So we think that we will be importing a whole lot of roses to brighten the place up directly. So that's going to be great as well. So we're looking forward to that. And I guess part of the planning for that is also we have, or the Rose Society has involved the City Council and the Botanic Gardens just to ramp up and beautify the current rose gardens that are around the city, and the various city councils, the different council areas are doing their best in planting and replanting some of their rose beds, so that there'll be plenty of public gardens of world standard for the international guests to look at when they are here.
All right, so that convention, is that a flower competition as well?
The convention will have, part of it will be the National Roses Society of Australia, their rose show. Once a year, there is a National Rose competition, and it varies from state to state. In fact, this year it's in Adelaide in spring, in conjunction with the annual meeting of the National Rose Society of Australia. And so once a year there is the national competition, and so we get interstate exhibitors who bring their roses in, and or from South Australia, if the timing is right, and it's not always possible that you have roses because Sydney and Brisbane, their roses in spring flower a little bit earlier than ours, and Melbourne is a bit later, so it depends on the timing, unlike orchids. But yeah, I mean the exhibitors do their best to get the roses here and put on a great show for the public.
Yeah, well, I certainly recommend the websites that go with these events. So if you go to the website for the National Rose Trial Garden, it's absolutely stunning. There's some brilliant photographs there of the different roses. And again, if you just do a search for the World Rose Convention 2021, you'll see another great website, and it tells you exactly what's going to be happening in the rose world in Adelaide. So thank you very much, Merv, for what you've done today. We're a lot wiser for having spoken to you, I think. Yep,
and I was just going to add a couple of things that may be of interest for the listeners with the trial garden, because the trial garden is unique from the point of view that we actually replant roses all the time in the same ground, and most people advise, and if you're in your own garden, we would generally advise people, if they dig a rose out, that they don't replant the rose in the same spot without replacing the soil. Well, because of the cost and the logistics involved in replacing soil in the botanic gardens, over a period of time we've developed a program where we regenerate the soil, and I think if people go on the website or have a look at the Rose Trial Garden Facebook page, they will see what we do. We plant 2 green crops in the resting year. We use Neutrog products, Sea Mungus and Go-Go Juice in that period of time, which regenerates the soil, and we're finding that if we do that, rest it for 12 months, regenerate it, we can replant roses in the same soil that we've had the roses in before. So it's an interesting program, and some people quite often will ask us what we do because they've got limited space to replant the rose, and if you can give it that 12 months turnaround, it certainly works very well.
Yeah, well, that's very important information for the average backyard gardener, because they've got limited ground to plant their roses. If they've wished to change their style or colours, they'll need to be able to do exactly the same as what you just said.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, thanks a lot, Merv, for that.
Thank you.
And we'll stay in touch and get more information about the convention and the trial garden down the track.
And we will do, and we hope to see some listeners at the People's Choice Weekend.
Okay, thanks a lot, mate.
Thank you.
See you again.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.